Chess. What words come to mind? Strategy. Genius. Anal beads. Chess, of course, is well known for these reasons. However, because I suck at chess, I want to compensate for it by making another game in Godot. And this game is called Hnefatafl. Hnefatafl. This board game is also referred to as King's Table. This is a Viking board game that was popular during the invasion of Britain. Because of this, the game was influenced by the Viking raids themselves, where the game represents Viking warfare, with one side defending a king and the other attempting to capture it. But this game faded into obscurity, with the popularity of chess coming into fruition around the same time. To play the game, the board is typically 11 by 11 squares, with the white king placed at the center. These are surrounded by white pieces, which function like rooks. The defending side, which is black, are the attacking pieces, and are arranged symmetrically across the board. The objective for white, the defenders, is to escort the king to one of the corners. The objective for black, the attackers, is to surround the king on all four sides, or on the very edge of the board by 3 pieces. All the normal pieces move like rooks, like chess, where they can move any square horizontally or vertically. The same goes with the king, except it can only go 1 square at a time. To capture a piece, one piece has to be flanked by 2 opposite pieces. This is different than chess, where you move a piece and then you take where it was before. To begin recreating this game in Godot was fairly straightforward. All I had to do was convert the code from a YouTube series by this guy about how he made chess, and to change the variables from that into this game. To begin, I decided to give this sort of a retro kind of feel because I think any other art form is more complicated. And plus I'm very familiar when it comes to pixel art. So I just created some pieces in A sprite representing the black piece, the white piece, and the white king. And then of course I made a board. And then I simply just set these as sprites and then did the necessary configuration so that it could configure with this array function that I've defined, with all these different pieces represented by different integers, with 1 and -1 being the white and black pieces, 2 being the king, and 0 for null, or nothing. Now, because I'm very new to coding, despite using this tutorial series, I came into a lot of hurdles, so I got the help with a guy named Tribute to help me. The first issue I had is that I assigned a value so that way it could display some dots. But the problem is that when I was displaying it, it meant that the board was configured in such a manner where it wasn't aligning properly. Because when I removed some pieces and displayed the king, to see if it could go anywhere, it was displaying the dots in the wrong place. The problem is that when I was trying to display the board variable, which is where we have this whole array, the issue had to do with I and j variables that I assigned to the function. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, when it comes to using arrays, the I and the j function are very useful when it comes to counting things within a certain row. I is just for counting a row itself, and j is for counting things that are specific within the row. All I had to do really was to change I to x and j to y. Bob's your uncle. The next problem I had was actually getting the pieces to move. So they were displaying the dots, but they weren't doing much else. And so I had to figure out why it wasn't replacing the old position with null and then moving the piece wherever I wanted it to. I looked at my input and set moves function that I made prior, but I had to rename some variables just so it was more organized, but then I couldn't really find what the issue was. So again, I got some help. Where the issue I found with the help of Tribute is that I just had to change some things in an if statement. In here, instead of saying if it was out, I just had to say if it wasn't a selected piece. Then it would be considered a selected piece, and then would show all the options that, as I said before, and then I would set the last thing as an else instead of an elif. And then the whole thing worked. Next I had to figure out how pieces could be captured through flanking, not regular taking. I created this capture piece function, so it turned everything into null, and then it would display the board, showing that everything would update. I also created a sandwich function, so if there were already 2 pieces either side, and if I moved an enemy piece in between them, and then placed it there, then it would remove. I don't know why you would want to do this in the game, but if you did this by accident, it's a way of trying to punish yourself and to learn from that so you don't make it in the future. I guess it's a sort of blunder in this game's sense. And one of the things I also had to make sure of, to make sure that this didn't factor in the king, because the whole way to win is that it had to be surrounded by multiple pieces, not just 2 black pieces. Now, because pieces in this game don't move like in chess, when I had to move another piece by grabbing it and then putting it to another, I had to make sure I added a break here, so that way when it displayed the dots, it wouldn't display a dot onto an enemy piece, indicating that you can't take it in this game. So instead, I created the capture function, so when you're flanking next to a certain piece with the position, and if a variable I defined earlier, plus the direction for this side, then it will capture the piece in the middle. One of the issues that I was having as well is figuring out why the king couldn't also capture pieces like the white piece. And then I looked at a piece of code earlier and realized that the only pieces that could account for this function was white, 1, and -1, black. But in this function here, it didn't have 2. And so all I really did is just copy and paste the whole thing and just replace this one with 2. And then that worked fine. I didn't really know how to put 1 and 2 like here next to each other, so I just left it like this. If it works, it works. I'm just gonna leave it alone. Now, this part was probably the most complicated, and probably more complicated part than what it had to be. So when I was trying to get the text working for the buttons, I couldn't figure out how to get rid of anti-aliasing. And so when I inputted this new font into the game assets itself, and tried to remove the anti-aliasing within the font itself with this program that I found online. But when I opened it up, it just looked like a Minecraft enchanting table, and I was really confused. And so I was at a complete loss, but then I realized that the solution was right there. That pretty much sums it up. This was a really fun project for me to do. All I had to do next was just create some sound effects, and add a title screen, and then, again, Bob is your uncle. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. This was a really interesting video to work on, and I hope this was cool, even though it's a bit different than my usual videos, because I'm very keen when it comes to making games. I've always wanted to do this, and I'm finally getting the chance to finally plant my feet when it comes to coding. And I'd also like to thank not only Tribute1, but also my dad for helping me with the coding. I would not know where to go if it wasn't for his help. Anyway, thank you for sticking along, and with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Oh, and if you want to play the game, it's also in the description if you'd like to play it. With that said, I'll see you in the next one.